Hopefully you can see the slides. So today we're going to talk kind of, I would say semi-basics, but say very important things about games and play element and all the related topics where this play element in games associate. Before I begin today's topic, and I do hope that people dare to comment, I have few questions during the presentation. I won't see the Discord, so hopefully you unmute and talk if it's possible. I don't know if it is. It will be awkward silence on the couple of points if nobody says anything. Anyways, first, I think it's good to know where the wind blows, so to speak. So who is speaking? So I am Jussi Autio. And if I have to summarize my career, I would say that I'm a business-oriented game designer. I've been in the game business for 18 years or over 18 years. I've founded 5 different companies. Not all have been like a primary work for me, but nowadays I also start business ideas just because they might be useful. Even though the first game company starting that is still the most scary thing I've done. CEO I've been 3 times, and game designer I've been in 4 different game companies. It's always a bit difficult to say that how many games have I designed. I think the smallest number is a dozen, but since I do quite a bit of consulting, then of course there is lots of games that never launched. So then the number could be doubled or tripled as well. If kind of like, okay, I helped a little bit someone, but is it big enough to say that I would have been a designer in that project? Probably not in many cases. But that being said, I do quite a bit of consultancy for existing companies, but also in incubators and like startup teams and universities, like to you guys. Back in the days, I designed and ran Oulu Game Lab, which back in its days was also selected as the best youth incubator in the world, which has opened me a lot of doors into interesting places. Namely, that I have since then helped over 40 game companies get established from idea to running business in 4 different countries. And only half of them have been born in Finland. As a CEO or producer, the most remarkable things are that sure, I can organize some funding quite well. I've been in charge of a mobile game back in 10 years ago that got 40 million downloads. Since then, I have worked only on PC platform, but never mind that. But the most fun adventure definitely was when I worked as a producer in a serious game company and helped 10 people company or startup work with 10 billion annual revenue medical giant. That was very interesting and eye-opening thing. And currently, I am basically bootstrapping the next big company and doing a bit of consulting to sustain myself. Still last month, I would have been working in Resistance games, but we decided to shut that down. So if someone has heard of Resistance games and still ponders on some of my slides that there might be some Resistance games logos that I forgot to remove, or Resistance game style key art, that's because I don't have replacement key art to go with it. I also teach game design at the Oulu University, and via my consulting business, also game business in Lapland University in Level Lappi project. So business and design is my forte, so to speak. But on towards our today's topic, I like to start from the beginning and kind of reflect back on things. And many people consider that we would have so much to learn from literature or movies that somehow that's where all the stories or story development comes from the Stone Age village where people gather together and human civilization gets born, and all theaters, movies, and everything can trace their roots back to that Stone Age moment some hundreds of thousands of years ago. But truth be told, that's not the origin of games, because origin of games goes way, way further. It goes all the way to here. Now, what do these kittens do is that they play. And what is games except play that where we have agreed on the rules beforehand? So it's very, very similar to the kittens play. Even more so because the flow moment that we all seek to search also in video games is the same magical moment what these kittens have. The alliance between serious and not serious, or true and not true. Let's imagine that one of the kittens bite too hard. Then it stops being a play and it starts to be a fight. The true wins the balance with the untrue. Or if one of the kittens doesn't want to participate, then the untrue wins and it's not a play because even the other one gets bored then. And this same element, I hope I remember to get back to this, but this can be seen also in moments where flow is disturbed in video games. If we hand over, or if we accidentally click on attack button at an RPG and we kill an innocent villager, and if the game world doesn't respond credibly, we stop being immersed into the game world and we realize that we're just sitting on a sofa in our home. Flow is destroyed. So similarly, what we're trying to achieve is the balance between true and untrue elements in video games. And it is quite stunning. I would go as far as to say that playing is the most natural form of human culture, in the sense that there is also evidence to back it up. Because wherever we see the first high cultures rise up, we also see games. Just to name a few examples, ancient Egypt, as we understand them, we probably think of pharaohs and pyramids and so forth. But in ancient Egypt, Senate boards have been found in pre-dynastic graves, meaning that the ancient Egypt, as we know it, is younger than board game Senate. The pharaohs did not yet exist when Senate already existed. If we jump to other parts of the globe, to China, modern China, as we know it, is born in the era of warring states when China was divided, and Confucius and other Chinese thinkers. It was considered the golden age of Chinese culture because basically the foundations were established. And already back then, three games were in the vogue. One was particularly popular by the military already. Sun Tzu probably played the Shang-Chi, if I remember right. I'm bad with remembering names. Liu Ba has the coolest anecdotes. I would love to share some very funny stories, but most importantly, Shang-Chi was already one of the fine refined arts, which even Confucius had to play if he wanted to be anyone in Chinese culture. And that game is still being played, even though modern world knows that same game by the name that the Japanese gave it, which is Go. And just to strike a point, uh, the oldest genre listing of games comes from the great Buddha from himself. He lists 16 different types of games, and well, some of them are clearly plays, not games, that he would not play, which means that it's a black list of games. I don't know if he left out some types of games that he would play, but at least he bans. I think first in the list is any game that would be played on 8x8 or 10x10 boards. That's one of the genres. So chess would go out of the window. And if I remember right, fifth or sixth in the list is any game where one player draws a picture and others try to guess what that represents. So Pictionary would be out of the window as well. But I think furthest or deepest appreciation for games comes from Johan Huizinga, which I also stole that alliance of true and untrue. He goes as far that without this play element and our capability to consider something true and untrue at the same time, no culture could exist. If you want to read really boring and philosophical book, his landmark book Homo Ludens, or Playing Man, was written 100 years ago. It has great points, but it's quite boring to read, to be uh, honest. And it just doesn't stop here. So around the world or around the history, whenever new technology appears, games are among the first ones to get adopted to that. Even so much that there is several or basically two examples why the modern joke, the porn industry, would dictate where the uh, history goes. That's not true. It's games. Twice games and porn have been fighting, and it's games that came out on top. Anyways, of course, stone and ivory was a big thing. When paper was introduced to Europe, that revolutionized gaming, and all of a sudden every place is filled with games. In 100 years, there is a after introduction of paper, a book lists 400 different types of games that Europeans play. That's not necessarily all the games, but that's huge amount of new games that appear in just 100 years. Printing press soon after paper does the same thing. Particularly playing cards get standardized by the printing press and influences games, of course, enormously. And coin operation, that is exactly where kind of dirty books, porn books in the early 1800s tried to use coin op mechanics that people wanted to have a bit dirty books, and they tried so that they wouldn't get caught if they sold it on machines that you just insert the coin. Nobody knows who brings the books. Well, of course, they just needed to wait. So it never became a big thing until 50 years later, when coin operations were added to games like Bagatelle, which later is called pin games, and then later evolves to pinball games. And well, games make the coin operation mechanics popular. And of course, television. When television arrives to Finland, game shows are already 12 years old invention. So 12 years before Finns got to see television, there were already people watching television where others play games. So instant adaptation to new technology. And of course, computers are interesting thing because they replaced board game simulations in warfare right after Second World War. Until then, militaries used board games to simulate stuff. But even if computers replaced board games, then those same supercomputers started having fun games in them as well. But sadly, even though games have millennia-long history, at least 5,500-year history, we don't really have as long theoretical research what makes games fun or good, like literature or movies have. Sure, we have archaeological background for hundreds of years that, hey, this has been a game, but not really what makes a game good. So in order to get started developing games, I think it's important to know what games are. So who would want to tell me how would you define a game? Now unmute yourself and comment. Or silence. Maybe it is that if as an audience you don't have the right to talk. I don't know. This is basically my first lecture in Discord, so I don't really know. Well, maybe then I will answer myself. Typically, what people define games is that, okay, it's interactive. There is some sort of goal. There might be what else people tend to throw. Sometimes competition, but the challenge with these things is that either if we want to be really good at defining games, either everything in life is games, which is not useful. That even like experimental theater where the actors interact with the audience, that's a game. Well, that's not helping us make better games. Or the other definitions are so strict that games like The Sims or City Skylines or anything that you can just explore your own creativity, those would cease to be games. So the challenge here, of course, that if we want to make as great games as possible, it would be great to be able to define at least somewhere that, okay, what are we doing? What are the things? And of course, already the City Skylines and the Sims, like not all games are about winning. Not all have a goal and so forth. But another very crucial question is that how games differ from other art forms. Sure, it's partially the same answers, but digging tiny bit deeper. And if you are able to talk, then please talk. And if not, maybe then everyone raise hand or make a sound effect so I know that it's not possible. This is the awkward bit.
Yeah, I requested to speak and
Good.
got the
Yes.
permission. Yeah, I guess one kind of traditional definition, if you compare to, for example, books or movies, is that they are kind of passive. So they don't usually involve any kind of interaction or kind of making choices. You are just kind of given a ready story or whatever, and then you just consume it. So you're not like partaking in it.
Yeah. Exactly. And what this basically means, what you said, is that in other art forms, because we are passive, we're not active members, we might interpret situations differently because we're different people. Because of our background, we might identify with other characters than someone else, but the source material is always the same. Whereas with games, we literally experience different things. Even on the most linear, let's say, shooter, would be tunnel running. But if I come to a situation with almost no health and you come there with full health, that might be the most difficult room for me, and you don't even remember it afterwards because it was so walk in the park for you. And then of course everyone knows that linear, like there is more or less linear games, but we basically experience totally different things in video games, or also in other types of games. How about what is gameplay? I'm sure everyone is familiar with that term, but how would you define it? Boldly requesting speech, and then hopefully Jones will grant. It's not automatic. Well, typically what is said is that gameplay is the king. So that is the single most important element, what makes game good. Uh, and what it basically is that it's the space where player interacts with game mechanics. It means that it's not exactly the same thing as art or music or story or controls, but combination of all that combined with the mechanics. So what happens when I press the button? Mechanics says that okay, my character attacks, but what impacts gameplay is there any sort of hint in the animations that hey, now attack animation starts, or enemy is about to attack, that I should rather click block? All that kind of subconscious messaging as well. I think the best way to highlight gameplay's importance in all part of the game is if you consider a loading screen. And if your game or my game has a loading screen that just teleports away, it feels unfinished. If your gameplay feels unfinished, it's not fun. But if there is fade effects, if there is like okay, accidental clicks doesn't instantly go, but there is the timer icon that shows, that gives that loading screen a polished experience. And gameplay basically means that okay, now I'm interacting with the loading screen, but then of course expanding that to all elements of the game. Now, game mechanics, of course, they set the boundaries where the game operates. So, what this game is about. Uh, these boundaries are probably the most critical to fully understand because they are the ones what dictate where players focus is. In movies or books, if we are let's imagine that we are in a car ride. In books where they are the readers and watchers, they are passive, so they are at the passenger seat. So all of their brain focus is on immersing into the world. They look at the view and oh, there is some summer party going on. Is it the bonfire that they're burning? Yeah, someone is making sausages. And what is that? The hot air balloon? But player is the driver, and the main focus of the driver is always on the steering wheel, changing the gears, slowing down or speeding up, making sure you don't hit other cars or pedestrians. And as long as those are handled, then the brain capacity is left for immersion and other elements, identification and so forth. So if your game wants to tell a story, it should be a story that your game mechanics support. Because often us developers, we have multiple fallacies. For example, typically there is always some game developers saying that people don't really care about the stories. And when you look at their game, they have a story that is totally separate, and then the gameplay is something totally different. So if even in the best writing, like AAA games, in long games at least, I have met with lots of fans of Witcher 3, which I also consider excellent writing, but there is just so much dialogue, which is just exposition, that it uh, goes like this. I hope the video plays.
Welcome to Honeywood. Hello, adventurer, and welcome to the town of Honeywood. Hello, adventure. Skip. There's a tribe. Skip. The castle. Skip. Monster. Skip. The sword of Skip. Here's the sword of Skip. Thank you, hero. We truly believe that.
Okay, so much for the skit. Another element is that players don't like to read, which is another just fallacy. Us developers blaming players for our own mistakes. Because if dialogue is part of the game, but it's just providing exposition, of course we skip reading it because we want to go back to playing the game. But then when someone finally gamifies dialogue, like Disco Elysium did, nobody minded reading 1.2 million words, where it has a branching narrative. So I'm sure that in one playthrough you read maybe a third of it. But still, even if out of 1.2 million words you would read a third of it, that's still worth several novels. And nobody cared. It was a huge hit. It would have become a Hollywood movie if the investor didn't turn out to be a nasty guy, and the internal struggles then caused some issues. So game mechanics, I want to emphasize, you don't have to make complex game mechanics like the Walking Dead, for example. Game mechanics are very shallow. You just walk, you have some action sequences where you aim and then shoot, and most of the time you just, okay, do I go help him or do I go help her? So you make choices. But that frees the brain capacity to immerse in this narrative. And the choices, how the story goes forward, that's tied into the game mechanics. Just like in Heavy Rains and others, even if it's quick time events, how you play Heavy Rain, but at least it's how the story goes forward. You never stop playing when situation goes forward. So basically, game mechanics dictate how player interacts with the game, even if you are making a story-driven game. So if you plan on making a story-driven game, make sure that the choices player make while playing the game, they should be integral part of the story. So if you're making a game where you crouch, jump, aim, and shoot, then make sure that you solve the story using those mechanics. Who do I shoot? Who do I save? And so forth. Then the game is constantly played, and the brain capacity is constantly in whatever your game is about. But of course, not all games need a story, and often, even if sometimes there is a story, often context is much more important. Context might mean comprehensible, credible game world, and let's face it that the world's best-selling game doesn't have much of a story. It's about Italian plumber who eats mushrooms and jumps on top of animals in order to save a princess. But still, the game world itself is coherent. If you added some laser weapons or aliens to it, it would still break the game. I hope I haven't played all the games. I hope they don't have laser weapons and aliens. But in any ways. So game mechanics is where player spends most of his time. if you want to create exposition, sometimes it's good to give player a piece of time that, okay, now I just had action sequence, let me cool down. But still, it's one of the most important things to remember is that we all have limited cognitive capacity. So we need to understand where the player is using it and try not to overload it. So if your game has lots of game mechanics, tutorials become a huge issue, and then the immersion doesn't necessarily start instantly, particularly if you're pushing too much information at once. Because unlike another fallacy, what people, at least outside games, I'm sure inside games, players understand that learning new things is not fun, even in games, even with all the reward mechanics we have. Getting to the mastery part, that's fun, but learning new things, that's the necessary evil that we need to go through in order to have fun. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to, by the way, interrupt me. I much rather wouldn't be the talking head, but rather have interaction also. Now, a bit more on the player's role. As we mentioned, player is very different beast from a reader or movie watcher. The source material for us changes, unlike in movies and books and theater and opera. And in a way, we always create our own story, even if the story itself is linear or if the game doesn't have a story. What we experience, that's our story still. It's even if we play a Europe Universalis or some strategy game, that's our making. So we create a different type of ownership over the overall experience. And of course, the fact that player is an active participant means that the immersion builds differently from other arts where viewer doesn't have to do anything. So make sure that the active participant doesn't, that the player has enough capacity in his or her brain to immerse on what you're doing. So pacing, which for us is a lot more difficult because players have a free will, but we need to consider pacing a lot more carefully than movies, because movies or books, they have the ultimate power, but we need to make sure that there is intense moments and more passive moments where player subconsciously can collect himself, because we can't be at the climax situation all the time and so forth. So keeping these in mind, intensive moments and more passive moments should build up still differently in games. And of course, player agency is something that the other art forms either doesn't have at all, or my dear colleague would go that, okay, books have a little, or book readers have a little bit of agency, but not in the same sense as players have. And by player agency, I mean that player needs to be able to influence his own character's decision, that he has control over his alter ego, whether he plays the game as himself or as some other character, but he needs to be allowed to make those decisions. And then the world needs to have understandable consequences for his actions. Whether it's good or bad, like for us developers, it means that if we save a village, then those NPCs will need to have different dialogues. That earlier, when they met you for the first time, they might say something very random, passive or whatever. But one after at least at least instantly after saving the village, the passive dialogues need to be praising the player's achievement. Because if at that moment of triumph the NPC would just give random dialogue, that would again be the slap in the face. Again, the untrue wins over the true, and then we are sitting on a sofa instead of being immersed in the game world. So the kitten bites too hard. Of course, stripping player of agency for a moment can be a powerful tool. I mean, bad things happen in life. Someone gets sick or is hit by a car or whatever. So it doesn't mean that player needs to have full agency, just agency over player's own actions. But if you are dead certain that, okay, this game needs to go like this and players doesn't have any input on this, or we just create illusion of the input, sooner or later player will realize that, okay, my input didn't matter at all, and then the immersion is broken. So occasionally for the turning points, stripping agency is fine, but constantly taking it away is not good. And in this sense, I would go as far as say that play don't show should be the slogan in video games. In other media, show don't tell refers that don't tell that some character is evil, just show them kick a cat and everyone hates that character. Sure, we can also show that this character is evil by showing that, but when it comes to players' decisions, it's always more immersive if player plays the key moments instead of looking at some animations. Then, of course, when we are thinking about the player, we should also consider how are we building sense of progression. Particularly if you're making free-to-play game, this is enormously important element. Particularly also that how do we build a sense of ownership for this experience as well. But sure, in premium games, it's equally important. Particularly if you are making a level-based game, then what elements subconsciously create the sense of progression? Are the levels getting more epic or more dangerous, or what elements make the player feel that it's not just endless grind, but I'm actually going forward in the game? And then the great thing, which is amazing, is that when player overcomes a challenge, feels good about him or herself, we can reward the player, kind of giving a bit of extra kick for that sense of accomplishment. So what are your reward mechanics, if any? Not all games have, but typically most games have some sort of reward mechanics. Often they tie together with the progression mechanics. Experience points can be a reward mechanics and leveling up progression. But you should consider what are your reward mechanics and what are the elements that you make the good job Jussi feel even greater, when that if I only solved some puzzle, then how does the game say good job Jussi? Oops, okay, I have animations again wrong. Then of course, I'm sure everyone has noticed with friends and with internet that players also respond very differently to different things, or same things they respond differently. And wouldn't it be nice that we could have a tool to predict that what players like and what do they consider important, and what type of player would respond with this way and who would respond that way? Let's continue using the Witcher example or RPG examples. Some players like to ransack every place, look at every chest and drawer and so forth. And for some players, that breaks the immersion, that a hero would not go search civilians' cabinets and steals their stuff. Well, there is clear indicators for whom the first is important and for whom the latter is important. And this ties to the fact that players often say that games are a form of escapism, that we experience things that we wouldn't experience otherwise. And this is true to some extent, but very small fraction of truth. Because in reality, games are closer to identity politics. That we as people or as players play the type of games based on the type of people we are. So what I mean by this is that when psychological tests like the ocean psychological test, that how open we are to new experiences, are we more practical or more curious? How conscientiousness we are we more careless and impulsive or organized and hardworking? Are we more introverted or extroverted? Are we more suspicious and critical or helpful and empathetic? And well, the neurotism didn't apply as much, but the ocean model also is that are we more calm or more anxious? Oops. So the ocean model has been adopted to games, and as they studied, they found 12 principal player motivations, which are the reasons why we play games and why we like different types of games. And of course, as we are different people, then for us, different motivations are important. To some motivation don't appeal at all, and some are super important. And these 12 different motivations form clusters, meaning that they come in pairs of two. So that in typical case, if you like destruction motivation, you like shooting at things, and you like when things blow up, then most likely you also like excitement, meaning fast-paced games and games that have quick surprises and immediate reactions and so forth. So here are the gamer motivation, the player motivations. I will have probably the next session I will have with all of you is that we're going to make a workshop on player motivation, and we're going to establish target audience based on player archetypes. And before, even if you haven't a single line of code, we can predict what type of players would like your game and have a clear target audience in mind. Just to quickly go through the motivations, the destruction and excitement form an action cluster. Then if you like competition, duels, matches, getting high rankings, most likely you also like community, being on a team, chatting and interacting, and they form a social cluster. Then clearly me as a person, I'm in the mastery cluster. I like games with high difficulty, that they come with big challenges. If game has Iron Man mode, which means that you can't save unless you close the game, I always put it on. And then strategy, meaning that if I make a decision now, then I see the outcome in 2 hours, building on top of the previous. Then the achievement cluster, probably the completion people, maybe even the power motivation people who like building from low level character to super powerful character. Both are probably the type of people who like ransacking the civilians' closets, particularly the completionists. They want to get all collectibles, all missions. If someone is high on this, probably the type of people who in RPGs go through people's closets. And probably if someone is high on immersion, so fantasy, being someone else, somewhere else, and liking elaborate stories, probably those with high of this, particularly if this isn't high, then they probably feel like, okay, if I did go through the closets, then it would break my immersion. And then last but not least is the creativity. So design motivation means I want to create a city or the Sims family to show my own personality, or dance move in Fortnite. And then discovery is that, okay, what happens if I do this and add that there? Ah, look at this. So exploring, tinkering, and experimenting. And the next one is just how you could also look at them is that how much that motivation is about the game world and how much is it about the player. So kind of which one is more important. And is it more cerebral, meaning more brain related, that it's all in your head, or more kinetic, more like roller coaster experience? This one here reminds me also that these are also cultural elements. So if someone is aiming for Chinese market or Asian markets, more collective societies tend to be also more similar when it comes to player motivations, that the same motivations are high. Whereas the individualism of the West is more visible also, that people like quite heavily different things. Any questions or comments so far before we go to the last hurrah of the talk? You can also ask questions after the session on Discord. I will be checking if anyone has anything to add or to comment or want to learn more. Last but not least, what I wanted to also provide on this play element is that when everything is still fuzzy and we are early stage in the development, and we want to go from idea to a concept, I think most of you are minimum, at least the ones that I already talked. There is still 3 that I didn't talk. Maybe most are already in concept. Maybe some are in a high level design stage. But the big challenge, which I would love to, or at least in the one-on-one sessions, also rise up elements how to ensure that the vision itself stays intact. That when we get into the development, one of the most crucial things it would be to establish good design pillars, which is one of the tools to make sure that in these later stages, when a programmer or artist or level designer or whoever is making micro decisions on the game, like we all do, otherwise the development doesn't go forward. So that it would still be constantly playing to the same goal, that one decision suddenly wouldn't start pulling the overall experience to some different thing, and then it would be a messy outcome. And just to give a rough idea, I'm sure you guys already are way past this, but just to highlight also my business side is that here is a quick view of internal pitch of a concept called Lake Toba. First concept doesn't have to look better than this. Just to quickly summarize, it's a 4X strategy game that ends where Sid Meier's civilization starts. So it covers the previous 50,000 or 70,000 years. And this was many years ago internal pitch, which highlighted the key elements of the concept. And since it was pretty good, it moved to a concept stage. It would be a pitch deck. Then already visualizations are there. There is now you can already sell the game. You should be able to explain more in depth what makes the game great. You should, on high level, like first time meeting, you should be able to explain everything. Like I could spend 15 minutes if needed on this screenshot alone, that why are these tiny icons here important, and why is it important that there is this tile is rougher looking than this one, and so forth. And some more of that. And I wanted to highlight this, that this already opened discussions, and then I would say high level design is when there is at least a game design document, some sort of working prototype. And then this one already, you can see the prototype, it's ugly looking prototype, but this has led 3 times close to a signing a multi-million deal. Sure, with an experienced team, but you can verify, like you can verify your game's interest early on, so that you would not put all your eggs in the same bucket, because if the project is to be failure, then it's better to fail early. And this is the level where already publishers are taking things seriously. So let's look up, I think, 1.5 minute or 2 minute video. All right, last slide. Methods to start if you are early. I would consider that what verbs does your game need to have. Basically, what will the player do? Is it select dialogue? Is it aim? Is it jump? Like listing the different verbs. That helps dictating where the player's focus is and what the player needs to be good at. Typically, if you're a bit further, and particularly I use the Ernest Adams challenges method whenever existing studio asks for my help on some design challenges they have. I typically then consider that, okay, what challenges are there in this game, and are the challenges the ones that developers wanted there to be? The key logic with Ernest Adams' method is that overcoming challenges brings feeling of accomplishment and joy, and then we can plan according to different challenges. I like this approach quite a lot. Then, depending on a bit of the game, particularly if it's abstract or story driven, then what decisions will the player make? So typically players love decisions or choices, but math problems are not choices. So apples and oranges by design, that's great. But if your RPG has skill based that I know how to use, my character knows how to use axe, not sword, then choosing between axe and sword is a math problem. It's not a choice that the player has. So trying to design interesting decisions for the player. Sid Meier's Civilization, of course, is prime example of this. Core loop from the Discord chats, I understood that that's already quite familiar, at least to some of the teams. So how does the game flow forward, and what does the player do? Planning the monetization, particularly on top of the core loop flow, is a good tool. And my own method, which I like to use quite a lot, is considering what is the core fun of the game. It can be maximum two things. What needs to be fun for the game to be fun, and then making sure that your features and content has elements what make that thing fun, and then there is elements that make it stay fun. It can be a single mechanic like throwing the birds in Angry Birds. Then what are the elements what makes throwing the birds fun? And then what are the elements that make it stay fun for 10 hours? Or Battle Brothers, the core mechanic could be the battle system where the Battle Brothers fight the monsters. And then what are the elements that make that battle fun and what makes it stay fun as well? And it also helps you focus your resources. So that's my start presentation for the GameCity Kajaani. I still don't know what the games is that what is the last word. I think GameCity is something, but anyways, that's all. Now, if there is questions or comments, I'll be happy to take them live. And then if there is some shy people, or if you realize you have a question later, then you can also write in the chat. But best ask now, because maybe other people were thinking of the same question or comment.
Hello again. I had this one point in the presentation you were talking about like what feels fun, and it reminded me because you were talking about mastery. I had this kind of point of contention. I remember you were saying something along the lines that kind of that is what feels fun, kind of mastery, and then learning is kind of unfun. I think maybe I subscribe to a little bit opposite idea. I remember, for example, I think Theory of Fun for Game Design, this book lays out this idea that is actually learning is kind of the fun part, and once you have kind of mastered the game system, that's often when things start feeling boring. I've wondered if you had any thoughts about this kind of opposite framing.
Interesting. I have only browsed that book. I wasn't very impressed myself.
Yeah,
I think that the key element is that usually people hate tutorials. And tutorials are the necessary evil. That, like, planning a good tutorial, most developers have strong opinion that we are going to make the best tutorial at some stage. That's the dream. And then to make a great tutorial that would feel fun, that's surprisingly difficult. I mean, the sense of learning when you realize that I just learned, that can be fun. But only once you did learn already. But when you are still haven't yet learned, then that's not fun. It's a bit same as in video games. If you're lost, that's not fun. That's annoying and rage quit. but exploring the unknown, that's fun. So if you have in the map some point that okay, then whenever I'm done exploring, I need to go that way, then exploring the unknown can be more fun because you're never lost. But some hardcore games that don't give any indicator where you're supposed to go, and if you're really really lost, I have no idea where to go, that can be unfun. Of course, once again, we are different.
Yep.
I would go back to the player motivations.
Yes.
So particularly games like what's that Dark Souls. Dark Souls seems to do everything against the school books.
Yeah.
Like it punishes. It's rather punishing and doesn't do any hand holding and so forth. But at the same time, it also has quite clear target audience or appeal who likes that. It's not really power. It's like power is about the character getting better. Challenge is player getting better. So any
Yep.
player that has high challenge, internal motivation, they don't mind the learning or the high difficulty, and for them even the learning part can be like actual fun because
Yeah.
that's the element. But if
Yeah.
someone is low on challenge, then they, particularly for those, the learning is like I'd rather play games that I already know, which is also like people like to think that they try out more games than they actually try out. Like I'm
Yeah.
always appalled how few, like at least with Steam, like they say that the average player, if you look at your own stats, I always play like twice the amount of new games, and compared to average Steam user, or 3 times. And I feel that nowadays I don't play that many new games, so it's a bit. So I think there is a point that some
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Maybe I can go. I think in the book it was framed something along the lines of like, I think the example used was like tic-tac-toe is like boring for adults, but it's fun as a kid because you kind of can, it's a super simple game. Once you kind of master the system, you kind of know that it always ends in a draw, so it's like pointless, useless game.
Yeah.
And this kind of, but then you have to reach a balance, because then the other end of the spectrum is like it's just noise, because you can't get any sense of the pattern, so you have to reach some kind of balance between those two. And I think I have a few thoughts that came into Yep.
Yeah, I think that is indeed the point, that when the challenge ends, the sense of mastery, like it stops being fun. So kind of like, okay, now I know how to be Batman really well, but if the enemies stay as low that we don't up the challenge, then sure it gets boring because I'm already better than the challenges. Better than what the challenges the game provides.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely too easy games can be also like will be also boring. So
Yes.
regarding this also, Ernest Adams made a good point in his Fundamentals of Game Design that people like it's not the player motivation, it's just same word, challenges. They like overcoming challenges, but even easy tasks become interesting if you add time challenge, like physical coordination challenge, like in Super Mario. Most of the jumps are not so interesting, but if there is a mushroom that goes forward and you have time pressure that it will go to the void if I don't make decisions fast, so that time pressure suddenly makes even the regular jumps interesting.
Yeah. Good stuff. I think when you mentioned Dark Souls, one thing that came into my mind, I think that game does well is that it kind of gives you the keys to the challenge on some level. You can like mediate the difficulty in that game pretty well. Like you can choose to use summons or certain types of builds, and you can make the game more challenging for yourself if you want, or you can make it easier for yourself. So I think that's really genius game design in that sense.
Yeah.
I had one more question actually regarding this when we went to motivations. I think one framework that I also like to think about when thinking about motivations is kind of this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivations. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because I think it's like I think at some level it's like almost possible to build a game entirely around like extrinsic, just rewards. You were talking earlier about rewards, and just kind of build game loop around like rewarding, because that alone feels good. You don't necessarily have to like even enjoy the moment thing that you are doing. You can just enjoy the things that you're getting, all the shinies and things like that. So that's one way to look at making games, is like which one do you value more, because you could build a game around that the reward is just the good feeling you get when you defeat the boss, for example. You don't necessarily get anything else.
Yeah. And it's important design decisions also, that will you build up reward mechanics or not. It will lead to very different experience. I think this whole intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, that should be like an entire lecture. I think that's very fruitful.
Definitely.
Topic. And I think that also the player motivation model reveals, at least if you stop to think about it, that which motivations are more prone to accepting game giving you goals, and which ones need to come from you. Like, I think the creativity bits are more of the intrinsic ones, and then maybe the immersion ones also appeal more to the. Wait, which way? Then the immersion is more extrinsic. That the game gives you the goals, and as such also sense of reward where it comes. And then pondering, like I'm sure destruction and excitement doesn't really have a say which one is better, but then clearly completionists, if the game says or measures something, I want to collect everything. So clearly taking the goals from the game.
Yeah, I had one more question that was just from the beginning. This is going entirely different direction from what we were just discussing. But you mentioned something about fight between porn and games. I don't know if we went over that, but I would like to hear what that part was about.
Yeah, good. I forgot to mention on the. I went tiny bit too early on building up on that, because then that was in the 80s. When VHS and was it minidisc fighting back then, and then on the 1990s, that will it be Blu-rays or HDTV formats. And at least on the 1990s, when game consoles decided to support Blu-rays, or was it the DVDs? I don't remember anymore which one. That was what made it standard. Sure, because VHS and then minidisc, it was mostly just picture. There, the porn industry, what they started supporting, dictated which one became the standard. But indeed, with coin op, there was like porn tried something, didn't work out, and then in the 1990s, it was more of console games that dictated which platform, which format becomes the standard. I don't know if the saying still is, because back in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was at least these jokes that porn industry is what dictates if there is two rival technologies, what becomes standard is what porn uses. But rather say that games is the one that dictates that.
Yeah, interesting. I'll let others go also.
10 points for you for making it less of a talking head. Good that someone also asked, also during the lecture keynote.
Hey, I got accepted to speech, so thank you for the presentation. I had one question regarding the gamer motivation model slide.
Yeah.
There you listed all those like motivations, and I was thinking when we are designing our own games, like should we pick one of these to focus on in that game, or could we pick multiple? Or if we would pick multiple, like would there like be 50-50 or 70-30, or what's your take on this?
Yeah, good. Most games, they like how the. Okay, I'll answer first my question on this, and then try to come back on your question. The workshop that we're going to do is analyze on percentages. You guys do it because you know your own game best. From 0 to 100, how high each motivation is in your game, and then we're gonna reverse engineer the results to provide the player archetypes. That these are the player archetypes that most likely are going to enjoy your game, based on the Quantic Foundry's 1.5 million player database. Now, how I would do it, how I would do it is that I would first do the analysis and then see that can we get even a bigger fit for specific archetypes that these bards, they tend to like also some motivation quite high, so this feature could fit in, so that then this motivation could be served tiny bit better. Or indeed, that do we start measuring time passed on a level so that it would appeal to challenge that, hey, speedrunners would like it better, or whichever. Now, if you're even earlier, then I think it is good idea to pick few, like I would say more than one, that clearly this game needs to be heavy on something, because people are different, and if you offer a little bit of everything to everyone, it's going to be difficult to reach liking of anyone then. But also, when studying the player archetypes, there is also like clear indicators, like the gladiators are the youngest archetype by average, and quite high on a lot more of the motivations than the other archetypes, where some are very low and they don't care about something, and so forth. And not to mention that there is no value positioned on does it need to be high or low. It could be that your game or my game could be 0 or 10% in excitement, because then it would be turn-based, serene, no hurry kind of experience, and it's as good. It's not these are not value-based, that some high on something would be better. It's rather that some people like serene experiences and some like adrenaline thrills. So who are you aiming for? So hopefully I answered. Try to figure out, at least if you have already a clear game concept that you're working on, what is the main motivation or a couple of main motivations. Then try to make sure that your game serves those really well, and they can be also found from like 0 motivation on this, like at the opposite end.
Okay, yeah, Yeah, thanks for the answer. I was like just curious, like, are there like any sort of, so to speak, cursed like combinations? So, like, if you were to pick like a strategy and destruction, like could all these fit together somehow, or are some combinations like cursed, so you can't make them fit with each other? Have you found out anything about that?
That's the like a very deep question, because often also what type of games exist like kind of changes us, because we don't have something. And indeed, maybe action and strategy games, maybe they don't exist, and your game would be first one to do it. So that would increase the risk factor. But then, like, business coach in me would say that if you're dead certain that this will lead to a great game, like the design mentor would first analyze, would this be a good game or not? And then the business would say that, okay, we're entering an interesting area, hopefully a blue ocean, that there is no other game like this that is high on this motivation and this motivation, the untypical thing. But I think the risk increases because people are probably not searching for such games. But it could be like business wise, you could also try to argue the opposite.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the answers.
And personally, I continue a tiny bit. Personally, I would try to fit the archetypes really well, because of course, even if I play a lot of strategy games, I do play RPGs and story-driven games as well. So even if I don't want story in my strategy games that much, then I might still score relatively okay levels on other motivations, which makes me fit on some archetype. So fitting specific archetype make sure that the game offers elements that the player is searching. And if you go to the website and do the test yourself, some players might get like a dual archetypes. I didn't get. I had the architect as a sole archetype, but I think half of the people say that your primary archetype is this and secondary archetype is that.
Right. Any more questions? And thanks, Jussi, for the keynote speech.
Yeah.
Let's talk about gems later.
I need to know where that gems comes from. So,
Yeah, we have plenty of brands. You just pick one.
yeah.
Right. So, any more questions for Jussi? All right. Seems that that's all the questions